Nigeria's National Action Committee on the African Continental Free Trade Area has started developing policies to support the growth of trade. Professor Ken Ife, lead consultant, industry and private sector development at the ECOWAS Commission, joins me to discuss this development. Professor Ken, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We know that the National Action Committee is developing policies, of course, for the African Continental Free Trade Area. Could you, and we know that they're going to be working with ministries, departments, and agencies creating synergies, especially those MDAs that have to do with export and trade. But help us understand what the starting point is, the strategies that could potentially be established, and of course, the overall big picture here.
First of all, there will be a strategy, AfCFTA strategy at the national level and also at the regional level. And if you remember, in 2019, Nigeria was a year behind in signing the AfCFTA agreement. In that intervening period, we went into consultation. And the consultation looked more at the national macroeconomic framework, looked at the situational analysis around the AfCFTA, and then all kinds of related risks and mitigation strategies, and now came down to prioritization of opportunities for trade and production. So all of those were done in that year. Then the next year, 2020, we began to look into 2021, we began to look into specifics of policy. And of course, constantly interacting with negotiating team, negotiating the trade in services and trade in goods. So those were going on. But quite lately now, we are also beginning to look at the trade policy itself, because the last trade policy we had in Nigeria was in 2002. It was supposed to be done every 5 years. It wasn't done in 2007. I was involved in 2012 when we did it, we wrote it. I wrote the trade facilitation component of the policy. But for some reason, the minister didn't present it to the Federal Executive Council. So we're now back, to today, we haven't had a successor plan, a strategy. And that also affected the ECOWAS to a regional strategy, because we got that ready at regional level, but Nigeria couldn't sign. But so we're all taking all at once now. So we're looking at reviewing the current strategy policy, the trade policy, and then a strategy for the AfCFTA, which will feed from that trade policy. And then, of course, a regional approach to the same AfCFTA strategy. So all of these are happening almost simultaneously. But in the context of what is actually being looked at now, you're going to be more specific on trade-related infrastructure that are necessary to prosecute our entry into the trade and performance. Then you have also trade-related governance issues and the governance institutions that have to be set up, especially the ones to deal with infractions and complaints and all that. Then you have trade facilitation on a much more regional and continental scale, and then negotiations are also there. Then you have investment climate reforms and ease of doing business that have to be strengthened, and as well as improving the trade capacity of the country to trade sustainably and conform, and competitiveness, of course, to conform to the requirements around the SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, technical specifications, and then non-tariff barriers. So all of these are work in progress that are being articulated in a corporate document.
Okay, now while this action committee is working on these strategies and policies, I imagine, or I want to imagine that there will be, wider consultation, perhaps especially with the private sector. I mean, obviously they are the ones. I mean, we're talking about small SMEs, in private companies. They are the ones who are going to be, embarking on this trade. So as you consult with the MDAs, what kind of consultation can we also expect, with the private sector?
The 1 year of delay was actually essentially to kickstart national level consultation. So that was extensive, because I took part in that. And that has continued at sectoral level, at regional level, at subnational level. So those consultations and streams are going on. And of course, there is a fair amount of representation of various private sector interests in the National Action Committee, as well as MDAs. So it's an organic process that is constantly feeding back and working with them to make sure that they can own whatever strategy that comes out at the end of the day.
Now, while this is happening, we know that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement itself has already, is already in full force. So I suppose this is, will be happening simultaneously. But talk to us, when you talk about trade-related infrastructure, could you shed more light on that? Could you go into specifics for us? What you would be discussing, addressing, and potential, excuse me, policies or strategies that could result as a result of those conversations?
Well, trade-related infrastructure, let's begin with agriculture. You have quality infrastructure is an essential no-go area for if you're going to export anything agricultural, you have to think about trade quality infrastructure. And that deals with standards, certification, the measures such as SPS, I mentioned those, SPS, TBT, NT, all those measures, and even the measurements, weights and measures, is all part of that. And various levels of certification at farm level, process level, and export level, all of those have to be in place because we are not creating any new rules. All these are already in the context of WTO, Multilateral Trading Organization. So what happens is that bilateral, plurilateral, and other organizations just try to implement what has already been agreed at WTO level. So we're not reinventing the wheel. But the capacity to do those is what you have to strategize on and not to change the standards. The standards are there. Then there's other infrastructure. You heard about the announcement that about $3.6 billion or something will be spent on building the Lagos-Abidjan transit corridor. So that's a rail highway infrastructure. You also have rail connectivity. You have power connectivity between nations. And if you look at WC World Bank in 2001, said that if you spend $20 billion in fulfilling the missing links in our regional infrastructure configuration, that will bring extra $250 billion in trade. So you can see a factor of 10 just by fulfilling the missing links across the countries. Then you have things like single window. In many countries of West Africa, they've implemented, but Nigeria has not implemented since 10, 11, 12 years now. We haven't implemented a national single window, but we are on the course to do that now. But until we do that, we wouldn't implement the regional single window, which is connecting up. And the others are ready. They're all waiting for us on our own side.
So it's certainly
other things like there are lots of other things around the airports, cargo, upgrading the cargo, upgrading the seaports, the air freight. So all of those are areas where we're receiving a lot of attention and investment to ensure that we can successfully export our products.
The National Action Committee certainly does have its, the NAC certainly does have its plate full, but I'd like to ask if there's a timeline for all of this. Like I mentioned earlier, the AfCFTA is already in motion. So is there a timeline to sort of, catch up?
It's a work in progress. Every aspect of it, trade-related governance is a work in progress. Facilitation is, facilitation is even a bigger attention has to go there because we are thinking about regional trade facilitation and we already have protocols that are in place. For example, we have free movement of goods, services, person, capital, and right of establishment. That is still there for how many years now? 2 decades. But that's still work in progress. We have a single passport that is working better than anywhere else in Africa. But we also have a trade exchange system that has just been launched, what they call PAPS, Pan-African Payment System and Settlement System that has just been launched by Afrexim Bank. That's a game changer. Once we get on board, It will be a game changer. So there are many things on the pipeline. The trade negotiation is still going on services. We haven't concluded the rules of origin in West Africa. Is still a little bit at variance with the rule of origin of AfCFTA. So we're working to harmonize those. Now, let alone all the other issues around establishing an audit mechanism.
All right, Professor, we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much for sharing that insight with us. We appreciate your time on the show today. Professor Ken Ife, Lead Consultant, Industry and Private Sector Development at the ECOWAS Commission.